Good morning, Crimies. I hope you had a good weekend so far and that you're ready to tackle the week up ahead. I'm usually ready. This Sunday, I'm just not feeling it, but it's inevitable. So, of course, I'm your host, MAB, and this week on the Coffee and Crime podcast, we're going to cover the second part of the Karissa Boudreau story. Before we do that, as usual, please listen to the following disclaimer.
The content delivered through this podcast will at times be graphic in nature and describe criminal conduct which includes but is not limited to violence, sexual assault, and homicide. All suspects described in the podcast are considered innocent until they are found guilty in a court of law. I'm not an expert on any subjects covered, I'm just an interested party. The content will be troubling and upsetting to some people, therefore, viewer or listener discretion is advised.
So last week we talked about Karissa, Penny, Vernon, Shane, Paul, and what role they each played in Carissa's life. We went over the details of the disappearance, etc. So let's pick up where we left off. Welcome to episode 8, part 2, Karissa Boudreau. So we're now in the cold, frigid month of February, and Penny, once again looking tired with Vernon next to her for support, pleads for Carissa's return. She urges her daughter to come home or to at least contact someone who can let them know that she's okay or where she is or that she's being taken care of. But you'll notice that during this appearance, we do not get the same Penny as the first time because for some reason she seems a lot more composed, and even though she tries to look worried and does have a runny nose, could be allergies, who knows, this time there are no tears at all. So when I said she deserved an Oscar nomination in the last episode, well, we're going to take that back. This performance was nothing like the last one she gave us, and personally, composed would be the very last word that would be used to describe me if my child was missing, and I would be out searching relentlessly, day and night. Based on all the searches, police are now pretty sure that Karissa is not in the LaHave River, and this starts to bring on even more gossip, speculations, accusations, with more of them implicating Penny versus Vernon at this point. And even though police know there's no way they can let this investigation go cold, especially when it's regarding the loss of a child, at the very same time, they're at a loss and not quite sure how to move the case forward. So they decide to seek the help from the RCMP. All investigative forces kind of join together, share all the information they have. They have tons of briefings, and they also share all the evidence that they've gathered. Fair playground, they all know the same thing. They're all starting at the same knowledge point, I guess. So police around this time admit to reporters that foul play is suspected, but that they don't have evidence that points the finger to someone specific. As you heard in Vernon's 2-part interview last week, he was getting the bulk of the accusations from people around them. And I just want to say that even though I understand that everyone has opinions, I really just wish that people would refrain from throwing them around and throwing unfounded accusations, I guess is what I'm looking for, around at people. It can literally ruin somebody's life. So think twice next time if you've ever done this to not do it again. Yes, I am momming you. And a side note here, as I do in most episodes, I really think that most accusations were directed towards Vernon because our human minds, those of us who aren't corrupted anyway, have such a hard time to fathom or imagine a mom doing something like this to their own child or to any child for that matter. It's much easier to blame a boyfriend or a stepdad or somebody who's not biologically related to the victim. So now it's February 9th, 2008, and that morning, dispatch receives a call, and you'll never guess what the caller is reporting. The caller, who is a woman, is reporting that their 9-year-old child spotted some human toes sticking up from the snow. Like, this poor little boy could actually see frozen toes sticking out from the snow. Wow. So obviously, or maybe sometimes not so obviously, these toes were connected to a body, and that body was the one of Karissa Boudreau. And then while the police are not sharing or releasing any information at the time, the investigation was officially a murder investigation. They received help from an examiner named Matt, and while searching the scene and the body, he concluded that the body had been placed there after death. So basically, this was not where the murder had taken place. The odd thing is that Carissa's pants were pulled down to her knees, and so were her panties. But Matt's years of experience led him to believe that her clothes were purposely left that way to lead investigators to think that Karissa had been sexually assaulted. However, she was not. I guess thankfully, at least there's that, right? Police often do this. They don't release much information. That way, when they arrest and charge someone for a crime like a murder, the person who committed the act would have information that only would only be known to the police. So that way they know for sure that the confession or the statements from that person corroborate with the evidence that was found at the scene. So if they did release the information, then that way there could be false confessions. Everybody would have all of the details. So it would be near impossible to know if this one person coming forward is telling the truth or not. So after the news made their rounds in the small community, people were devastated, to put it mildly, and a lot of residents in the community decided to gather to honor Carissa's memory. But who had done this? I know you know, just like I know, but let me tell my story. I don't know if you have all heard of the Mr. Big sting operations, but it's when police here in Canada use a technique where they sort of create a fake environment with, again, fake criminals who are undercover cops that they're part of a fake crime organizations. Everything about it is fake. So they use all of this fake created world that they're pretty good at making look real, and they try to obtain a suspect's confession. It's very controversial, but if it can help catch bad guys, I'm all for it. So now I forgot to write this down, and I can't remember if it's right around Valentine's Day or I think it was actually on Valentine's Day. Penny and Vernon both get arrested separately, and this is where the Mr. Big sting comes into play. So essentially, they had some people undercover with the goal being to obtain a confession, hopefully from both parties. Now, as Penny as Vern and Vernon are being held in jail, they each have undercover officers in their respected jails, female to female, male to male. Now, police just need to figure out how they can gather enough evidence to actually charge someone for Carissa's murder. And at this point, they're still unsure of whether Vernon and Penny both had a role in this crime, or just one of them, or neither, but they're pretty confident they know what's going on. So police held a media release, and they officially confirmed that the remains found were those belonging to 12-year-old Karissa Boudreau. Because Carissa had braces, they had more than enough dental records to confirm the information provided. There was x-rays, they were confident, 100%. Plus, I mean, it hadn't been, months where she had been left in the snow. So she was obviously recognizable. And even months into it, in the cold and snow, it would have been like frozen, preserved evidence, I guess. So they said this is all they could share at the time, and that it was an ongoing investigation, but that they believed it was an isolated incident, so no threat to the public, I guess. Now, back in jail, even though there are undercover officers with Vernon and Penny, they still didn't have any solid evidence putting either one at the scene of the crime. So February 15th, which I believe was the very next day, they both get released. And to top all that off, people of the town are still super unsettled because no one has been arrested yet. So the police are conducting their investigation. They're pretty sure they know what's going on. Then we have Penny and Vernon, who, I mean, Vernon is convinced he didn't do anything. So is Penny, but, we know Penny. And then there's the public who doesn't really know what's going on behind the scenes. So really, I would be panicking too, not knowing who killed this little girl. Now it's time to conduct the autopsy, and as Matt had suspected earlier, they were able to confirm that there was no evidence at all showing that Carissa had been sexually violated. So they were comfortable ruling that out. Again, thankfully. However, the examiner was able to confirm to the conclusion that the manner of death was homicide and that Karissa had died by asphyxiation from strangulation. Since they had been released, Penny and Vernon were able to attend Carissa's funeral together on February 19th, and they were far from being the only ones. So many people attended, and later a memorial spot was made where people could keep visiting to keep Carissa's memory alive. Then something odd happened. Right around this time, for reasons unknown, people started shifting the blame from Vernon and strongly putting it on Penny. Now, back to the Mr. Big Sting. In Canada, if a judge approves a warrant and signs off on it, it then becomes fair game and it's completely legal to wiretap or video record undercover operations and officers who are pretending to be criminals. Yay, Canada. That's a good thing. So during these operations, initially they work on gaining trust from the suspects. And once they have that, they introduce them to a head honcho or a bigwig, someone who holds some power in the criminal organization. And even though this sounds easy, it can actually take a long time to get there, even months. I think this is to make them feel important, which also builds even more trust. So now we have Vernon who's boozing heavily at this point, and he can't even really go anywhere without hearing whispers and getting dirty looks from people. That would be awkward and uncomfortable. Being a really quiet man who kept to himself, he realized that life would never quite be the same again. And now, remember earlier when I said Vernon had an undercover police with him in jail? Well, they became friends, and as part of the greater plan, the undercover had offered Vernon a job as a delivery person, and around the end of February, they touched base again about this employment opportunity, and Vernon started working for the fake business that he, of course, thought was real. So everything is going according to plan. We're on the right track. Sometime in March, Vernon and Penny's relationship take a bit of a shift, and even though they're still engaged and they're still together, they begin to live separately. And no matter what the undercover officers try to say or do, Vernon relentlessly asserts his innocence in Carissa's disappearance. Also, right around this time, they convince Penny to become involved in this crime organization too. So she becomes a delivery person for the same company Vernon delivers for, and things are slowly but surely moving along. There's hope. Anyway, so long story short, over time, trust is gained. Not only was trust established, but the undercover people, who did a fabulous job, by the way, finally managed to obtain the truth. All of the sleepless nights and long hours had finally paid off. Penny spilled her beans. So brace yourself, because I'm going to break down the true version of events for you. So the story that had been repeated countless times by Penny was sort of accurate for the first couple minutes, but clearly she had left some pretty pertinent parts out. So Penny and Karissa did go for a drive in hopes to have a heart-to-heart. However, during the drive, Karissa kept telling Penny that she wanted to get out of the car. When darkness started to settle, Penny made her way to a secluded road, stopped the car, and told Karissa something like, "You wanted to get out? Then get out." And Karissa does. Once Carissa's out of the car, Penny also gets out of the car and starts to walk over to the side where, Carissa's standing. But as she's getting closer, she slips on the ice and she ends up tackling Karissa to the ground. As the 12-year-old laid on the cold ground, only two words left her mouth: "Mommy, don't." How friggin' heart-wrenching is that? Anyway, as if this isn't all sorts of messed up already, Penny pins her down, placed her knee on Carissa's chest, and because Carissa's hands were behind her back and she couldn't free herself, there was absolutely nothing she could do to fight back. Penny's on her chest, so even kicking and moving her legs is not going to do anything because she's not low enough to receive any of the blows unless she's you know, gymnast flexible. And she has no access to her arms. So she's still fully conscious, and I can't even imagine what's going through this little girl's head, while the woman who gave birth to her is the one who will soon take that very life away. I cannot even imagine what that would feel like. So Penny grabs a piece of twine that she had in her pocket and wraps it around her daughter's neck. She then pulled tightly until Karissa slowly becomes lifeless. Unreal. And it takes a few minutes to kill someone by strangulation, so this is just all sorts of disturbing to me. And then, as if she hadn't just taken somebody's life, never mind somebody, but her own daughter's life, she ever so casually puts Carissa's body back in the car. Penny drives to a different location where she pulls Carissa's body out of the car and drags her roughly 130-pound body to the side or on the bank of the LaHave River. And when she was dragging Karissa, that's when her pants sort of got pulled down and her panties did too. And like, as a mom, instead of like, you've already killed her. I know there's obviously no remorse there, and there's no common sense. There's nothing in this woman's brain. But I would never want my daughter to be found that way. But in Penny's mind, she left everything as is, and she thought, well, this is perfect because it would lead people to think that her daughter was sexually assaulted, shifting the blame away from her because usually it would be a male who would do something like that. She had also planned it this way because with the amount of snow coming, she knew that it would take some time before anyone found Karissa. So the entire time that this birthing human is searching for her daughter with Vernon in the bad weather, and as she was calling police to report her daughter missing, she darn well knew where Karissa was the entire time. What a waste of resources. So after Penny confesses to killing her only daughter, she takes the undercover officers to the Tim Hortons where she disposed of the twine inside of a coffee cup. And I mean, obviously, they weren't going to recuperate that evidence. There's, thousands of coffee cups. There's no way. It was impossible. And Penny also admitted planning her daughter's murder for days. And again, later, she finally gets arrested. And the arrest would happen on June 13th in Halifax, to be specific. After 4 agonizing months, on June 14th, 2008, Penny realized that she had been duped by police and agrees to give, basically a written confession, which provided every little detail of what happened the day Carissa was murdered. Bridgewater police held a conference to announce that after countless hours of investigation, they had finally arrested the person responsible for this homicide. Another side note, I think it's important to mention that even though a lot of people were pointing the finger at Vernon, the undercover cops were really, really adamant after the Mr. Big sting that Vernon had nothing to do with the crime. Vernon says himself multiple times that he knew something sounded odd, something just didn't feel right in his gut, but he loved Penny and wanted to support her and never thought that she would ever do anything like that. So, of course, he believed her. Earlier, when I said police sometimes hold information that only the suspect would know, so they can later cross reference this, essentially it's called holdback evidence. And Penny's details matched perfectly all of the holdback evidence that the police had kept to themselves, like hook, line, and sinker. It bothers me so much that someone who gave birth to another human can even think of planning their death for days, let alone act on that thought. I can't wrap my mind around that. I'm a mom and I could never, ever, ever even remotely think of doing something like that, planning something like that, thinking of doing something like that. And there's something so gross about the fact that she was sometimes described as being jovial when she was talking about the events that day and when she was reenacting them. This is so disturbing. And after she confessed, it's almost like a switch was turned off, an emotional switch of some kind that most of us just don't have. We feel, right? We feel no remorse at all, none, zilch, nada. Another part that gets me a little unhinged is coming up. So by 8:30 a.m. on court day, people and the media are literally lined up all the way up the sidewalk, and they're covering the grounds outside, waiting for the courthouse to open their doors and for court proceedings to begin. So Monday, June 16th saw a lot of people, and I mean over 100 were there that day, and they were there to witness Penny be charged for first-degree murder. She was also ordered not to have contact with 4 people. So there was Vernon, Paul, Shane, and April. And as she was led out of the courthouse, she was insulted left, right, and center by people outside. They were just like screaming insults. And I'm not saying it's okay, but I guess Sometimes it's deserved. Penny was sent to the Central Nova Scotia Correctional Facility in the Burnside Industrial Park in Halifax, and that's close to the Halifax Harbor. And the only time she left prison was to be escorted to court appearances. She wasn't really liked much in prison because inmates aren't usually fans of people who kill children, babies, etc., especially when it's your own child. She was definitely in a category of her own. Something I want to bring up that kind of gets me a little spicy is the Elizabeth Fry Foundation. Please don't come at me. Just hear me out. I'm entitled to my opinion. Again, don't come at me for this. But just a little bit of background. They have been offering services to women who have come in conflict, with the law or that are incarcerated. Not bad so far. I can get behind that. They work to dispel biases and break down barriers around poverty, violence, and addiction. Okay, I'm still on board. They provide information and support through court processes and reintegration into society. I'm still okay with that. I think that's important. But here's where I get a little spicy. Another inmate who's in the same prison as Penny ends up leaking a story to the media that Penny gets her nails done and her hair colored in prison by the Elizabeth Fry Foundation. The society explained that because Penny wasn't someone seeking drugs or experiencing mental health issues, she qualified for certain programs. Hold up. I'm feeling some sort of way about this. I agree it's amazing that women and minority inmates have help and assistance in doing all these things, because I think you don't always know, obviously, if it's your first time behind bars, you don't know how to handle stuff or what to do or how to apply for parole, etc. So it's good that there's somebody to sort of handhold, I guess. But the thing that gets me is, like, can we not leave the pampering out of it? I know people who work full time and they can't afford to get their nails done. I know people who use box dye because they can't afford to get their hair done. But murder someone and the foundation has your back, and they'll hook you up with a spa day, no problem. I'm all for support, but this is a luxury. You're in prison because you murdered somebody. You murdered your own child. You should not get access to luxury. Another quick side note here, filicide is the act of a parent intentionally killing their own child. The word comes from the Latin words filius, which is son, or filia, daughter, and caedere, to kill. It's a specific type of homicide where the perpetrator is a parent and the victim is their child. Even though this isn't common at all, clearly it does happen because this story is proof of that. And people had such a hard time, again, wrapping their minds around a mother planning her own child's death, that I think this is partially why the story gained so much media attention. So in prison, Penny had to be evaluated to determine if she was fit to stand trial. This is pretty common, happens all the time. She had a possible diagnosis of major depressive disorder and a general anxiety disorder. She also had borderline personality traits, fear of abandonment, distrust of others, a history of unstable relationships, mood swings, and paranoia. Okay, but that describes some people I know, and they're not child killers. So again, make it make sense. Anyway, so the legal teams meet to decide sort of where to go from here. In December, the Nova Scotia Supreme Court welcomes a very quiet Penny. At the time of this hearing, a lot of evidence was still sealed and not accessible, so the judge advised the legal teams that they would unseal the records and invite them back in a few days. So this way, again, it would be like fair fighting grounds because nobody actually knew all of the evidence or all of the information available. By January 2009, it becomes pretty clear that if this case does go to trial, it likely wouldn't be scheduled to start until much later in the year. So the Crown prosecutors accept a guilty plea of second-degree murder with the condition that she would agree to serve 20 years before becoming eligible for parole. It's been a year by now since the day of the murder. 2 days after this, the courtroom is packed full, and emotions were running really high at the time. It catches everyone by surprise when the court is advised that Penny wishes to tender a plea of guilty to second-degree murder, a lesser offense. They also confirm that she wishes to re-elect her mode of trial from judge and jury to judge only. After going over all of the evidence, people in the courtroom were struggling to hold it together. Not Penny, though. She was all right. I know. Side note again, I'm so sorry. Penny always said she would have done anything for Vernon. She also said that he gave her an ultimatum it was either him or Karissa. And based on his interview, I don't think he gave her an ultimatum, but more that Penny perceived what he said as being an ultimatum. I think he was just firm in telling her that basically this was too much. He could no longer live that way. And her and Karissa needed to learn to get along, or he was just going to bail. And to me, that's not a threat. It's not an ultimatum. It's stating a fact. I can no longer do this. You need to figure it out, or I am leaving. So let's just keep that in mind. People break up or separate every day, and kids don't die over this. Like, I guess I just really don't get it. Basically, Penny saw Karissa as an obstacle in her relationship with Vernon. Karissa was just in the way. Seriously, though. I've said this in previous episodes, but in Canada, second-degree murder means life in prison without parole eligibility for at least 10 years. This time, Penny cried. Not because she felt awful about ending her daughter's life, but for herself, because she was caught, busted, and she was going to pay for what she did to Karissa. She ended up getting sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 15 years. But there's always a catch. After 15 years, she could apply for parole under the faint hope clause. I had no idea what that was, so I had to look it up, and I'll share with you guys what I found. So, if you're like me, you probably didn't know what it was either, but the faint hope clause is a provision that allows certain prisoners, especially ones convicted of murder or high treason and sentenced to life in prison without parole for 15 years or more, to apply for a review of their parole ineligibility after serving a certain period. So that period is usually 15 years, which means she could technically apply for parole after 15 years. And this provision allows a jury to potentially reduce the period of ineligibility for parole, offering a chance for early release. So I guess my question is, why do we sentence people in the first place if they use different reasons to try to get released early? I guess I just don't understand. This is where my sister comes in handy because she's a lawyer. I reach out to her a lot. Thanks, Mahian. I'm glad Vernon got to share his story in the 2-part interview that I shared in the last episode last week. 2018, Penny is serving her time in the Nova Institution for Women in Truro, Nova Scotia. She had already reached out to the parole board and she had been granted temporary escorted passes into society. She just wanted these to attend church on Sundays, apparently. Penny, you need more than church, girl. Do they not? I thought they had little chapels in prisons, but I've never been there, so I wouldn't know. Anyway, irrelevant. They got approved. She got granted. So, to help fight her case for more escorted visits, Penny shared that she had attempted to take her own life years before and that she had also lost her mother to suicide at a young age. So, the parole board agrees and she's assigned 2 escorts to accompany her on her outings. Paul was absolutely shocked when he heard the news. Petitions were signed asking for Penny not to have any freedom or outings, but they had zero impact. Penny's freedom passes kept increasing, and somehow, some way, they just kept getting approved. In June 2028, regardless of what happens, she'll have served her time and she'll become eligible for parole. Surely she wouldn't return to Bridgewater, where she would likely not have any supporters, right? It would be kind of hard to start over in the same small town where you committed the crime. And again, because it's a small community, there's no running away from it. The case made national news, so where would she go? Would she assume a new identity to remain safe outside of prison? Do you think the 23 escorted outings she got were justified? Because I certainly don't. Let me know your thoughts about this case in the comments, as always. Nobody does, but I would appreciate if somebody did, other than my mom. Again, I can't even imagine how Paul feels, because by letting her move back in with Penny, he really thought he was giving his daughter nothing but the best. He really thought that he was making the best decision for Karissa. I don't even know, but I guess now he's remarried. I wrote it down here. He has a 10-year-old stepson and he also has a little girl. So I'm glad that he was able to sort of rebuild a part of his life, even though what happened will always be with them. So as usual, please subscribe, join, like, follow, comment, and share. It's free for you. It helps me tremendously. It's the only way that I can grow my channel. So if you like my stories and if you like how I tell them, please, please, please show your support in that way. Don't forget to join me next Sunday at 11 a.m. Atlantic Standard Time for another all new episode. And I will post, as I usually do on Wednesday, what the next episode will be about. So remember, crime is a waste of time. Bye, Crimies.